My name is Philip Thompson. I'm Deputy Mayor of New York for Strategic Initiatives. My pronouns are he, him, his, I think. I have also been appointed to serve on the Racial Justice Commission as a commissioner, and I stand before you today, or sit before you today in that capacity. I also want to introduce the other commissioners present with us today. And sitting next to me on my left and right are my fellow commissioners, and I'll start to my right. And I'll ask each commissioner to introduce yourself briefly and say your pronouns.
Hi, I'm Fred Davey, he, him. In my day job, I work at Union Theological Seminary as a seminary exec. And I also chair the city's Civilian Complaint Review Board. I live in Long Island City in Queens, and I'm very glad to be here tonight.
Good evening. My name is Larry Daniel Favors, Center for Law and Social Justice Interim Executive Director at Medgar Evers College. Very much looking forward to the conversation this evening.
Good evening, Henry Garrido. I'm the Executive Director, District Council 37, and resident on the Bronx, from the Bronx. And I am also the Vice Chair of a commission. Thank you.
Good afternoon, turning evening. I'm Jennifer Jones Austin. I lead the Federation of Protestant Welfare Agencies, and am honored to both be with you all of you this evening, and to serve on this commission and hold the position of chair. Good evening.
Hi, I'm Christopher Coy. I'm a retired Executive Director of Asian Americans Equality, and then also the chair of, former chair of the Renaissance Economic Development Corporation.
Good evening. My name is Joanne Yu. I'm the Executive Director of the Asian Americans Federation.
Thank you. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the history of the land in which we convene. We are right on top of the land that initially was inhabited by the Munsee Lenape and Wappinger peoples. And the Lenape, by the way, occupied land all the way down to Delaware. And I also want to acknowledge the amazing history of this space that we're in today. The Schomburg, as you all know, is an integral part of the Harlem community and New York City at large. In 1905, this building was opened as the 135th Street Branch Library. And in 1920, Schomburg employed the first Black librarian of the New York Public Library System, Catherine Allen Latimer. After several decades of hosting a collection of art and literature donated by the Afro-Puerto Rican scholar Arturo Alfonso Schomburg, in 1972, this building was given the name it holds today, the Schomburg Center for Research and Black Culture. By donating his collection, Arturo Schomburg sought to show that Black people have a history and a culture, and thus are in no way inferior to other peoples. Today in 2021, we continue the mission that many, including Arturo Schomburg, started to ensure that race does not determine one's life outcomes. So we thank all of you for attending tonight's session to continue the fight and tell us what you believe are the most critical issues we, the commission, should address through changes to the New York City Charter that would have the greatest impact on the lives of New Yorkers in the borough of Manhattan and across New York City. Before we begin, if anyone needs interpretation, please go to the part of the room where interpretation services are provided, and that's over to my right. And with that, I'll turn to our chair, Jennifer Jones Austin.
Thank you, Commissioner Thompson. I want to take just a few minutes to make sure that we all have a good working appreciation of what the Racial Justice Commission is and what we're doing. The commission was appointed by Mayor de Blasio in March of this year to work together and in partnership with the community to develop changes to the city's charter that will uproot structural racism, changes that will center on those foundational laws that allow institutions, policies, and programs to perpetuate racism and both racism and racist outcomes, racist disparities, racial disparities here in New York City. What we're doing is engaging with all of you to gather information that will help us as we seek to develop charter revision proposals, to create proposals that are going to lay the groundwork. I think it's important to note, lay the groundwork for a racially equitable city where race is not a determinant of economic, political, social, or psychological outcomes. I say lay the groundwork because the work that we're doing together is not going to change overnight racism in this society. But if we can essentially weed out or gut out those structural foundational laws and divisions of power and the like, structural, structural underpinnings in the charter that determine who has power, who has access, who has opportunity. If we can do that and replace it with foundations that promote racial equity, then we'll have moved the needle to a certain degree and the work will flow therefrom. What I want you to appreciate is that we're going to develop the proposals, but then what will happen is that we have to present them to the New York City voting community. You all will have a chance not just tonight to inform what we're doing, but when it comes to voting time in November 2022, you're going to cast your vote in favor or in opposition of the proposals that we put forward. So you'll have that opportunity once again to have your voice be heard. The commission is composed of 11 members. You see before you, I guess I'm going to do the math right now. There are 7 of us. There are 7 of us up here. Not present with us is Kay Bain out of Queens, Yesenia Mata from Staten Island. Let's see, we're missing Anna Bermudez out of Brooklyn. And Derek Hamilton out of Brooklyn, New York. All boroughs are represented on the commission. The charter, just very quickly, is the Constitution of New York City. It's the foundation of our government. The charter determines the roles and responsibilities of city agencies, the mayor, and other local elected officials. The commission is empowered to propose changes to the city charter. They, as I just said, have to be approved by New York City voters. We can propose direct changes that will affect you, your families, neighborhoods, and communities, such as how city government spends money and makes decisions. We can change government in all aspects of life, including health, education, housing, economic opportunities, and policing. We can create and change agencies and the powers of officials. Just important to note, this is not just about programs and policies. It's about foundational structural laws.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We also want you to know the statement or hear the statement of purpose for why we are here. We want you to know that the commission values your expertise as an engaged resident of New York City. Every single voice matters. You have firsthand experience on the ways in which the city government impacts everyday life, from sanitation, garbage pickup, to housing security and affordability, zoning, parks, small businesses on your streets and corridors, public safety, and so much more. So today we're here to listen to you, to hear what critical issues most impact your ability to feel empowered, gain access to resources and services, and have opportunities to live a thriving, healthy, and safe life in your respective. We need your help. We need your help identifying barriers to achieving racial justice. We need your help to bring the commission's attention to the commission's attention ways the government acts unfairly, so that we might know about that and address it. Your collective input will help us identify patterns that point to larger structural issues within the city. Your input helps us know what issues are most important and most pressing to everyday New Yorkers. Every testimony will be kept in the city record, and the highlighted issues will shape what the commission creates as ballot measures. Your input will quite literally shape recommendations for ballot measures in the November 2022 election.
So we're going to do things a little differently than in most public hearings. We're going to take the necessary steps to restore balance of power to the community. So we have incorporated restorative justice techniques into this session. Because of the design of the space, we're trying not to, well, we haven't been able to do it as much as we would like, but not to necessarily sit typically as is often done. In some places, we've been able to do semicircles. We're not able to do that here, but what we're going to do is ask that when people speak, they come to the stage, and so that we have a sense of being level one with another. Understood? I'll talk more about that in just a minute. So we're going to begin this session first with an acknowledgement of the harm racism has caused Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. We're then going to review some group agreements to set the foundation for our session tonight, at which point we will start community testimony. If you haven't already signed up to testify and you're interested in doing so, please sign up at the table that is right outside of this auditorium. Every person, each and every person will have 3 minutes to testify. Whether you are an individual within the community, an elected official or other, you will have just 3 minutes to testify, to be fair to everyone. There are no titles here and there's no rank. Everybody has 3 minutes. There'll be a stop clock to help guide you to stay on time. Commissioners will ask follow-up questions of those testifying, but just note that what we may likely do is hear a few people testify and then have Q&A. And so if you're testifying, please, if you don't have to run out, please stay, because questions may be asked at the end of the group that is brought up at the same time. Note that we have REST responders that are staff trained to provide emotional support if and when necessary. If you're having a difficult time emotionally with anything that is said in this meeting, we want you all to feel free to speak with our REST responders. And if I may just ask the commission staff to help us identify those people in the room. If you are a REST responder, would you please indicate by just raising your hand? Thank you. Please do so again, because some may not have. Just raise your hands, please. There's one on the left in the corner and one on the right. We're going to start by calling up the first 4 people to testify. Those 4 people will stand in a line, or they can be seated to my left and to your respective right. There are numbered seats right here in the front on your right. Numbers 1 through 4. We're going to call 4 people at a time, and we'll call you in order to come up. When you come up, if you're able to, we'd like you to come up to the stage, to the microphone right here to the left of Commissioner Yu. If you're not able to take the steps or do not want to take the steps, please let us know and we'll make sure that we bring the microphone to you. Let's see. After the last person's testimony, again, we're going to open the floor to commissioners to ask follow-up questions. Also, just stay close enough so that you're in close enough proximity to answer the question. Stay close enough when you finish testifying, just go back to where you were so you're close enough. After the Q&A, excuse me, the next 4 people will be called to make their way to the microphone to give testimony. May take a couple of times for us to get this right, but our staff, our awesome staff, will guide us all through this process. So just be patient with your fellow persons giving testimony and with us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We are also here today to acknowledge what many of us already know, that racial inequities are baked into the very foundations of this city. Deep-seated structural inequities continue to be reflected in almost every aspect of life, including health, education, public safety, and how our communities are resourced. Many of you in this room have borne the brunt of this reality for far too long. Though the Racial Justice Commission, through the commission, we have an opportunity to start to address and rectify the harms of the past through structural changes to city government and how it functions, to adequately and equitably serve all New Yorkers, no matter the race, color, or the zip code. So with that, since there are too many of us to do this collectively, we have worked to create group agreements. Let me see. Here's some of the agreements that we have collectively agreed to. Respect for ourselves for showing up and participating and doing the work of seeking racial justice. Respect for the space that we occupy. Respect for the health and safety of ourselves and our community. We will agree to wear masks and social distance ourselves. Respect for each other's right to speak. One mic. We will turn off our cell phones volume. Turn off our cell phones and turn down the cell phone values. We will not cheer, boo, or speak while someone is testifying. Respect for each other's time. We will respect the 3-minute time limit. Love, honesty, and transparency. If there's something we have mentioned today that you cannot agree to, well, hearing nothing, thank you. If we could all agree to these points, we will have a very successful and fruitful discussion today.
Thank you, commissioners. So we're going to begin our community testimony now. I'm going to ask the following 4 people to come to the front and to position yourselves in the seats that have been labeled numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. Laila Lake, Pierre Gooding, Arva Rice, Joshua Clennon. The first is Laila Lake. Second is Pierre Gooding. Third, Arva Rice. And fourth, Joshua Clennon. Just want to remind everyone that this gathering is being streamed live streamed to the public. We want to make sure that when you present, you speak into the microphone so that the live stream audience can hear you. And also just want to remind everyone in the room that if you have written testimony that you'd like to submit, we want you to do that as well. And the Racial Justice Commission staff are both outside and then here in the front. If you would wave your hands so people know who you are and you can share your written testimony with them. So now let's begin. And Laila Lake, the floor is yours.
Good evening. My name is Laila Lake. I'm 3rd generation from Sugar Hill, Harlem. My grandmother was born in 1908 and she came here from Florida, escaping like Jim Crow laws. I know my family history very well. And it was always my goal to become a teacher. I graduated from the New School University in Parsons. And just from manifestation, I landed my absolute dream job, which was to be the director for the Boys and Girls Club. We just had opened up a clubhouse on 155th and Bradhurst. In order for me to get to work, I had to walk 2 blocks to get to work, which was to walk down the block of 155th Street and Amsterdam to St. Nicholas. This is a neighborhood that I grew up in all my life. So I started noticing that there were men that were standing by the C train that I had never seen before. Because I have to get to work, I noticed that they were there every day consistently, and they kept harassing me and other people and asking us if we wanted medicine. You want medicine, Mom? You want medicine? You want medicine? I started to pay attention to what was happening, and I realized that they were drug dealers. That's number one. And why they were standing on 155th Street in Amsterdam is because they were looking for people who were addicted to meth, who were on the bus, and they were selling drugs or trading drugs right there in the open all day, every day. I started to be very concerned about this. It's blatant, it's in the daytime, and this is how I had to get to work. So I started to reach out to people in my community and ask them if they were being harassed. Yes, they were being harassed. These were old people. If anyone is familiar with 155th Street, Amsterdam, St. Nick, there are two senior citizens homes. There are working class people, and there's public schools. They are standing right by the C train, blatantly selling drugs, trading drugs. And I brought this to the attention at first of the precinct, of the 30th precinct, and they told me basically it's not their problem because that technically is in the district of the 33rd precinct. I think there's a huge disconnect. There used to be a slogan, if you see something, say something. And there's also something within my culture, which is like, you don't snitch. But I'm a teacher, and I'm concerned not just for myself, but for my students who have to go, even though I don't work at that public school, they're still students because they could attend the Boys and Girls Club. How are they going to get to the clubhouse if they're afraid to even walk by the drug dealers? I went and talked to the principal who told me that, yes, they have students who have been harassed by the drug dealers. I started to try to bring this to the attention of everyone around me, and they were all concerned. I feel that, first of all, going to speak to police, the police literally told me to cross the street, walk on the other side of the street. I myself have been harassed. I have it on video footage of the drug dealers crossing the street and coming to ask me if I want medicine. I have never taken drugs a day in my life. The exact same thing, it's not even about anything. They harass everybody. This is beyond quality of life. This is dangerous. Not only are they outside, but they're in their cars, watching things. It's organized crime, and it's blatant. Who are we supposed to go to and speak to about these issues? That's my main issue. That's why I'm here today, and I'm bringing it to your attention. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The next person to speak is Pierre Gooding.
Hi, yes, my name is Pierre Gooding. I am a Harlem community member, two-time city council candidate, and a concerned constituent. I am very excited the Racial Justice Commission is here to take all of the recommendations of our Harlemites. The issue that I want to bring forward today is housing justice, an issue that I think should be acknowledged explicitly in our charter. Currently, we know we are the #1 city for homelessness. We have approximately 80,000 homeless individuals in our communities, which is unacceptable. What I'd like to see is an explicit acknowledgement that the AMI, the area median income in our community, should be paired by district in terms of acknowledging who is up for affordable housing. What you have right now is area median income for the entire city, which prices out many Harlemites because the area median income in our community is approximately $35,000, which doesn't align with the $66,000, I believe, median income across the city. So I'd like to see it be district by district and also have an explicit right to shelter and a right to housing in our charter, which is currently not the case. We know that there's an immense amount of housing injustice in our community, and we are trying to rectify that with policy and laws that matter. So we appreciate your time, and we hope to see this get done. Again, my name is Pierre Gooding. I'm a deacon in the community, and I've seen firsthand running 2 homeless shelters, one in Queens and one in Harlem, the amount of injustice in our community. So we are hoping and praying that we can add that revision. Thank you so much for your time. I thank Aaron Berry and the members of the commission for pulling this together and for the opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Arbor Rice, I'm not sure that she has joined us just yet. All right, not seeing her. Let's move to Joshua Clennon.
Good evening. My name is Joshua Clennon. I'm a son of Harlem, a community leader and former candidate for city council. I first want to start off my public input with the topic of civic education. Civic education must become a part of the core curriculum for all public schools throughout our city. Our communities, particularly Black and Brown communities, working class communities, lack civic education, lack the information on their local and state governments. By not informing and educating students on the local government and the resources available to them, we are disenfranchising generations of New Yorkers from participating in the political process and truly engaging and influencing the social economic conditions that they face in their everyday lives. In addition to that, housing is a critical issue for all of our communities. Each year, as the city grapples and struggles to develop more affordable housing, we are losing hundreds, if not thousands, of rent stabilized housing due to illegal rent destabilization, forced evictions, and tenants who do not have the means to organize lawyers and take cases to Supreme Court often find it impossible to overturn illegal evictions, illegal rent increases, and are constantly facing displacement in Black and Brown communities. In addition to that, city programs such as the third-party transfer have directly targeted homeowners in Black and Brown communities, where we've seen cooperatives, HDFCs, brownstones being targeted by this program, and longtime homeowners losing all the generational wealth that they've amassed in this community. Programs such as the third-party transfer should be totally wiped out, erased, and programs such as the Article 11 tax exemption program should be expanded, especially now after this pandemic, to give small homeowners, HDFC cooperatives, greater opportunity to have a second chance to get tax forgiveness so that they can retain equity in Black and Brown communities and further prevent displacement in Black and Brown communities. And lastly, I would just like to add that the euler process for the city must be reformed. Community boards and the community itself should have greater input in the euler process. The city council nor the mayor should be able to override the concerns of people who live in our communities, who have to face every single day the long-term implications of massive rezoning proposals. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I will now turn to the commission members to ask you all to present your questions to those who testified. But please let me know by showing of your hand if you have a question for any of those who've testified thus far.
I have,
Okay, begin with
Ms. Lake. Yeah, the question was about the intersection that you mentioned was 155th. What was the cross street?
Amsterdam and St. Nicholas. We're going to get a mic.
That's right. Okay. And the second question was for Mr. Gooding regarding the AMI that you discussed in the district.
Yes.
By district, you mean community district, or you mean some other formulation?
I wouldn't mind whether it was city council district or community board districts or some other district that we sort of came up with, as long as the area was related to where you actually live, because we know some districts just make much more money. And so the people who are trying to get affordable housing are priced out because they can't afford the affordable housing. So it has to be paired with where you actually live so that you have a chance. Otherwise, if you're not living downtown or making $66,000, you're just never going to get through NYC Connect. So you have a massive problem. And it's the reason why so many people are left in a situation where they're fighting for private housing right now and can't afford it. So you have a working homeless class because of the policy that we currently have.
You know, if I may I just wanted to seek further clarification, and I want to give to you, I want you to hear how I'm hearing what you're saying to make sure that I'm understanding it. So let's just take the Harlem community. as an example. And the fact that over the course of the last several years, the homes, the houses have appreciated significantly in value and have essentially priced out many persons who otherwise have lived in this community for many, many years. The people who are moving in have significantly higher incomes than many of the people who've been here and many of the people who may be residing just 2 blocks away in longstanding apartment buildings. And so the area, the median income can be thrown off by that factor. That's what you're speaking to.
You're absolutely correct. And the issue is urgency, because that turnover is happening every day that you don't have this system in place. You go backwards because the gap is widening, and then you just can't catch up. You end up leaving New York City for greener pastures and less rent.
Right.
And we're seeing it every single day, especially in COVID. People just don't have the money to live here, and they have no options. And there's just a mass exodus. You're absolutely right. The urgency has to be there. The more time that we don't tackle this issue, the more we are going to have sort of a 2-tier system in housing.
Right. And you're talking about not just looking at it at the community district level, but perhaps census tract.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. Very good. Commissioner Daniel Favors and Commissioner Davey.
Thank all of you for your comments and the issues that you raised. I want to speak specifically to the issue of the abdication of responsibility by police in the situation that you referenced, ma'am. Our role is to think beyond the immediate resolution of a specific issue and to think more in terms of structural changes so that the issue that you are experiencing here, which frankly mirrors experiences that I have in Bed-Stuy, would not necessarily be pinpointed to that specific block, but would look at what the system is allowing to fester. Would it be, in your opinion, advisable for us as commissioners to think more critically about ensuring that the resources that are necessary to prevent the development of the situation that you referenced, would you advise us as commissioners, or do you think it would be helpful for us as commissioners to think about ensuring that there is an equitable distribution of social services, perhaps violence preventers, services specifically targeted that go beyond police intervention, but in fact are more targeted at looking at what the root causes of those issues are, and then ensure that there is some sort of funding mechanism, policy mechanism that would allow us to pinpoint the issue as it shows up throughout the city without necessarily looking to police as the only alternative. What are your thoughts on that? And if not, what would you advise us to think about as we look not just to that specific block, but thinking about how this issue shows up throughout the city?
So the impact of methadone clinics is huge within the Harlem community. What I find is that there are people who are coming from 125th Street and Lenox, where there's a methadone clinic. They're on the M3 bus and the BX bus, and that's why they're traveling to 155th to then sell the drugs to the drug dealers. And that's why they're standing there in the first place and looking at who's on the bus and just asking every random person, medicine, 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 because they're targeting more specifically those people who are coming from methadone clinics, who are not taking the drugs, who are selling the drugs back to the drug dealers. So they're also going to open up a methadone clinic on 145th Street in Amsterdam, right next to the library. The huge impact that methadone clinics are having in Harlem is tremendous. If anyone has been to Whole Foods or that area in Lenox, it looks like the absolute night of the living dead. I just was there today. And it's disgusting. And it's literally our children are stepping over bodies that are just laying in the street. They're stepping over people that are doing drugs, heroin, in broad daylight in the morning. It is disgusting. And I don't know what the disconnect is. I don't think that it starts with the police trying to figure out, because the police are just there basically to figure out the problem afterwards. It's the whole big picture of what's happening in Harlem right now. And it's all connected, and people are absolutely terrified. I grew up in Harlem my entire life. I do not ever remember seeing what I'm seeing right now, from 125th Street all the way up to where I live. And it's disgusting. And children from the Harlem Children's Zone, Success Academy, all these public schools who are going to be going back to school in September, they have to constantly commute through this on a daily basis. Psychologically, it's damaging to all of us in the community. Elders are terrified because like elders usually go out in the morning time. They're terrified. I've seen horrible things. I've had people like show their private parts to me, expose themselves. I've seen people defecating in the street. I've seen all kinds of things, prostitution, all of this. I remember Harlem. I've been here my entire life. That's why I said it, I'm third generation. I see the disgusting demise, and there's a huge disconnect to what's happening right now. Of course, it doesn't just start with the police. It's an entire conversation that needs to happen. But what's happening is just a huge neglect of everything going on. So that's the best of my ability of how I can answer your question.
Thank you for that clarification. And if I can ask a follow-up, it sounds as though at a particular level, you're talking about the oversaturation of the Harlem community with specific clinics, similar to the oversaturation of specific Black and Brown communities with homeless shelters and other sort of catch-all spaces that are targeted or cited in communities like ours, without regard to the underlying or the unintended consequences that you're referencing. Whereas you could go through entire communities that do not look like ours, and you might not find a single clinic in that space. Is that an accurate reflection of part of what you're saying?
It's also a perfect storm because we're dealing with the pandemic. We're dealing with people at the same time. If you don't have resources for young people, they're also out on the street. You know what I'm saying? They're also wandering around with no place to go. It's because of also all of those things. So, I mean, it's a huge conversation. I think we're all part of it, and we're all witnessing the same things. But for me, yeah, the methadone clinics and the way in which people of certain populations, in terms of shelters, we are being overloaded with these places, and these people, everyone is like, you know, it's just exploding, because that kind of conversation, you have to be sensitive. I'm sensitive to homeless people. I'm sensitive to people who are on drugs. I understand that these are still human beings, but what I'm saying is it's such a huge neglect right now. Literally, like, was on the M2 bus, and a homeless woman got on the bus with no shoes on, just sat down. Everybody got, like, people don't know how to react to these situations. And it happens so quickly. We haven't even talked about like this amount of shoplifting and theft and like crimes that are happening in real time on 125th Street and things like that. People are just witnessing these things and being frozen. Like, everyone is just on alert at all times, all the time, and hyper super alert. Because it's like, what do? These things are immediately happening. You just have to try to fend for your life and get out the way.
Thank you. And Madam Chair, I have another question, but I'll allow
We'll
pass
go to
the mic.
Commissioner Davey, and then we'll come back to Commissioner Thompson, and then continue, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So my question is to Mr. Clinton. It has to do with actually a point that the chair made when in her opening remarks, and that Commissioner Favors just raised, and this is the issue of structural reform, that our task is about how we look at the charter and systems and government, and then make recommendations. And you had 4: civic ed in public schools, housing, particularly looking at eliminating rent stabilized, looking at the elimination of rent stabilized housing, third-party transfer in Article 11, and then the euler process. So my question to you is, can you, and this may be on the spot, but think about the kind of structural changes, or maybe think about it once you are not here and share it with us, that need to happen in the charter in order for us to get at the root causes of the issues, these 4 issues that you've raised here tonight?
One thing is the Department of Education's curriculum must include civic education. There is no requirement for civic. So in schools, public schools, most students learn about the federal government. You learn about Congress, the presidential election, but you don't learn anything about, you know, your state assembly member, your state senator. You don't learn about your city council member. You don't learn that there's a borough president. You don't learn that there's a community board that you can go to. You don't learn about any of these offices or the resources that they have to provide you, their responsibilities and duties. So people really don't know who to go to when they have issues. A lot of times they stumble into these offices by accident, and they don't really have the knowledge to really hold their their representatives accountable when they're not doing the jobs that they're supposed to do. So that's, you know, led to a lot of distrust with the political system for Black and Brown communities, a lot of apathy. a lot of lack of participation where we don't have people engaged, we don't have people participating or voting. And it's really just exacerbated the longstanding issues that we've had because people are not engaged and elected officials are not being held accountable. So civic education, it must be a requirement for the core curriculum for across the entire city. In terms of housing, HPD as an agency needs to be reformed or overhauled. HPD does a lot of offshoring of its work where it relies on other contractors to provide oversight over, buildings that are under regulations with HPD. HPD does very little monitoring itself and oversight in terms of enforcing its own regulatory agreements. That's something that structurally has to change. Whether or not they have the budget or capacity to do that may be an issue, or may in itself be an issue in terms of just the way that the agency is structured. Within HPD, within all the city agencies, to be honest, there's a lack of cohesiveness and collaboration. You can contact one agency, say for example, if a building owner, small business, small homeowner, co-op owner has questions about its property taxes. HPD has a division within its office that works with property taxes, obviously, but they'll direct you to contact the Department of Finance. There's no cohesive, no collaboration, cross communication, even within the agencies themselves. People in different departments within the agencies do not collaborate or communicate. So in terms of a constituent trying to get anything done, it's a terrible time. You have to, everybody gives you the runaround. You have to contact 6 or 5 people, follow up with 6 or 5 people to get anything done.
I'm gonna interject here. Just appreciate all that you're saying. We have to keep it moving, but you're really speaking to the element of constituent services as well and responsiveness. Is that fair?
Not so much in terms of constituent services.
When you talk, I'm not talking about just the civic engagement. I just want to make sure I'm capturing the essence of what you're speaking to, and I want to make sure we get it because we've got a lot more people who want to testify. So very quickly, you're saying something other than constituent services in terms of the government responding to New Yorkers and their needs.
Enforcing the government's laws, enforcing the city's regulatory agreements with developers, holding them accountable.
Oh, okay. Okay, good deal. Thank you, sir. I believe that Commissioner Thompson has a question.
Yeah. To the name I did, was it Layla? So I just wanted you to know there's separate from this process, the city has established something called the Task Force on Racial Inclusion and Equity. It's headed by a woman named Sadia Sherman, who lives in Harlem. And if you go to newyorkcity.gov/TRIE, I suggest you set up a meeting with Sadia or a phone call, let her know what's going on. And I'm also a co-chair of that task force, and we can follow up on the specific issue that you're raising about methadone clinics and drug dealing, et cetera. Something very similar is happening in the South Bronx, and we've taken action around that. So I'm happy to do that fully apart from this process. In relation to this process, what I hear is the issue of equitable siting of methadone clinics and other kinds of public, they call them NIMBYs, things that most communities don't want too many of, bus depots, sewage waste transfer stations, et cetera, that Harlem gets an unfair share of those. So I hear that as a general issue. I wanted to ask 2 other quick things. In terms of AMI and who defines it, my understanding, and maybe our lawyers can look at this, my understanding is that HUD sets the AMI boundaries. And the city does not have the authority to say it should be here and not there.
HUD does set the AMI, but it needs to be in conjunction with the city because otherwise you're just going to have an AMI that is out of whack with your district. So in New York City, New York State could theoretically work to make sure the AMI is wherever it needs to be. It doesn't have to be just a federal. It doesn't have to just be federal. It could be state and city involvement too, in whatever program or system New York City or state wanted. It's just a matter of whether we want to set the AMI at a certain limit. I understand what you're saying, but there.
Let me just interject here, because again, we have many people who want to testify and want to make sure that we hear from everyone. What I'm hearing in this moment is that a question about authority in connection with AMI has been raised. We will explore that, but I'm also hearing that, is there opportunity to do something different than on top of to challenge that? And that's something that you're suggesting that we look into. Is that fair? Good job.
Yeah.
Okay.
And lastly, it was Joshua. So this is a question for anyone, but one of the things I've noticed over the decades is community boards, even though on paper they may have the same powers, some community boards are in neighborhoods where a lot of, say, architects and real estate attorneys and others donate pro bono time. And so they're able to get their way on a lot of things, whereas other communities don't have all those resources available. So if we give more power to some communities, say, as you suggest with Euler, how do we actually ensure that we're also not giving more power to wealthier communities with a lot of resources that don't really, will fight citing of a methadone clinic with everything in their power, et cetera? How do we ensure or counterbalance that inequality across community boards? And again, I'm not arguing against community power. I'm saying, how do we do it in a way that we just don't perpetuate inequality that exists now?
Well, to your last point, and it's something I wanted to raise actually, methadone clinics have very few restrictions in New York City, unlike other municipalities throughout the country. In New York City, a methadone clinic can be built in most residential zoning, any commercial zoning, and any manufacturing zoning. So what methadone clinic providers have done in Harlem is they've purchased private property in commercial zoning or residential zoning, and as long as they don't need a zoning variance, they totally bypass the Euler process, bypass any community input from elected officials whatsoever. So that's what they're doing. We need zoning restrictions on those type of facilities. Going back to your other question, first and foremost, for every community, the community board is a vessel, right? We're a vessel for engagement with the community. So in any Euler process, the public forums is a huge part of it, where it's a public session where we invite the entire community. And believe me, based in my experience sitting on a community board in Harlem, we pack every seat in the room. People let their feelings on this zoning well known, and 9 times out of 10, 99.9% of the time, the community board is going to side with the community. And the elected representatives, the city council member, is going to side with the community board and the community. And you hope that the borough president next will also side with them in the process. But if a city council can overturn that community's decision, and a sitting mayor can overturn that community's decision, then you lead to the problems that we've seen in various rezonings throughout the city, such as the Inwood rezoning, the disastrous East Harlem rezoning, and things of that nature. So I don't think empowering our communities is the problem here. As a community board, we've requested, Community Board 10, we've requested that the city actually give us a budget to be able to spend on urban planning so that we can do our own independent studies for these rezoning proposals that come about. The city has given us, pennies.
Mr.
chips,
Clinton, I'm
nothing
just
to-
going to interject here. I'm really appreciating all that the panelists are, no, you're on point. I want you to hear that I believe very much that you're on point. And what I'm going to ask is that you allow us to follow up with you and you provide your contact information, because a lot of the ideas that you're all presenting, what you're hearing from us is we're actually sitting here thinking about what you're saying, and we're thinking through what may be the challenges associated. What are the things that we need to control for? How do we do good while doing no further harm? So we're probably going to have to come back to you just to learn more from you. I know that Commissioner Yu has a question. Are we good with moving on?
My question was addressed in the
Okay,
AMI.
good deal. So I want to hear from Commissioner Yu.
Sure. I just wanted to acknowledge Mr. McLennan's comments about civic engagement in public schools. I hear you, because I feel like every election, we complain about who's not voting. It's mostly communities of color, yet there has been very little resources spent educating our own communities about the importance, especially immigrant communities. And so I really appreciate your comment, and thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to clarify. You're not suggesting we go back to the Board of Estimates model prior to the Euler, right? You're suggesting a new model that's not those two.
I'm not.
Or are you, let me
suggesting-
finish. I'm sorry, let me just clarify. Or are you suggesting we reform the current Euler process to institute a level in between? Because there's been many discussions about how, eliminating that, the Board of Estimates and all that, empower communities and gave the Euler process to a more local empowering of zones. And I hear what you're saying and agree with us, a lot of the things that you're saying. But I think part of what we're struggling here as commissioners is what do we do about it, right? How do we amend the charter in a way, if we were to propose that as an idea, that as our Deputy Mayor Thompson said, we don't create more harm than good by trying to fix a problem and creating another one that may be bigger or larger in this case.
And so we're going to conclude this group of testimony and move to the next group. But I do want you all, as well as everyone in the audience, to appreciate that we're going back and forth because we're listening. And in real time, we're trying to process and think about what you're presenting and how it might play out. And so, sometimes we don't have the answers. Not just going to say sometimes we don't have all the answers just yet. This is why we're coming to you. And you may not have a specific answer to every question being posed. We're just engaging in the dialogue to try to get to that place we all need to be. Good deal? And we want everybody else to know that. So we're going to move on to the next group. I want to thank you, those who've had the opportunity to testify thus far. And now we're going to move on to the next four persons. I want to apologize in advance if I mispronounce anyone's name. The next four persons are Shamil T. Bilal. And again, correct me if I have mispronounced your name when you come forward. The first person, Shamil T. Bilal. The second person, Randall Wiltz. The third, Kaneen Holder. And the fourth person, Julius Tajidin. Thank you very much. Please come over to your right to the front. And Shamil Bilal, please come forward as our first person in this group. Please begin.
Yes, you did pronounce my name right. Thank you. I just want to ask a question because I live in East Harlem myself. I was born in the Metropolitan Hospital, which is located at 96 and 2nd Avenue. Harlem changed a lot since I was born. And even though I've been living in other places, Harlem has been my only hometown ever since then. And Harlem is not how it is before. Now it's getting more gentrified than how it was before. I would talk about how there's a lack of education with people of color, of how teachers are actually treating them in my community, which is East Harlem, like I said, and would like to know why this is still happening to this day. Because Harlem is not how it was to be before. Harlem never had drug dealers. Harlem never had any any higher crime rates. Harlem never had any specific issue that is happening right now that, like I've just said. So I would like to know as of to why that is happening in our community and why there's no community board members, no commissioners, none of that is at the area of Harlem at this moment to speak out of what's going on. Even though they're speaking out in other districts, why isn't Harlem being pointed out as we are community fighting to get some change around Harlem to go back the way it was? Why is there no one talking about that? Also, another thing I want to say is that with the police brutality and all that stuff, that's also happening in Harlem, is what's causing the changes that it's happening right now. The police officers right now are not even coordinating with communities how they used to before, because it's mostly people of color that live there and getting brutalized almost every single day. And I'd like to know that why as well as that's happening in my community, which is Harlem. And that's all I have the questions for you right now. And I appreciate you listening. Thank you.
Thank you. The next person to speak, Randall Wiltz.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening.
I just have a couple of brief comments concerning some of the issues that have been raised before with regards to housing and discrimination, probably employment discrimination. I'm originally from New Orleans, but I've been here for 15 years. I came here to go to NYU Law, and I anticipate in enrolling in Columbia University's social justice program to start my PhD work this fall. So I think that what you guys are doing is amazing, but I think that we need like a little bit more teeth in terms of actually making force of law.
Mhm.
I think that it needs to be like a venue established for documenting like the thousands of cases of discrimination, housing discrimination, employment discrimination, and either something to make a commission like this permanent or expanding the powers of HRC. Because there have been too many instances where violators, offenders have been able to skirt the law. Also like to consider like some sort of like look back statute for past harms, similar to what was done for sexual assault and harassment, because some of the statutes of limitations are like too short, and sometimes people are not aware of their rights until after that time. Like if it involves like a city and agency, I think you have sort of like 90 days to like get your complaint on file, which I think is like way too short. And also there seems to be like a conflict between the city advancing social justice, and when it's the city involved or some agency involved, then you have the lawyers on the other side on behalf of the city actually fighting people who have been victimized. So they've been victimized all over again. It needs to be some conciliation process where if the city did something wrong, they should acknowledge that and use that as an opportunity to address these like systemic racial structures. Too many times like money, power, and privilege is used to circumvent agency rules in courts. I've watched lawyers go into court and talk to judges and get the verdict or get the decision that they wanted to get. I think that landlords should not be allowed like tax breaks and credits while they're engaging in discriminatory practices. I think that should be restricted from doing business with the city in these situations. And definitely nonprofit statuses should be restricted when they engage in those types of practices. Basically, sunlight is the best disinfectant, and we need to make this stuff public because it's like allowed to hide too many times and go unpunished. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is Kaneen Holder with us?
Yes.
Hi. And please just give me the correct pronunciation of your name.
Sure.
Good evening. Thank you all so much. I'm really, really excited to address this illustrious commission to end racism. I laugh, but I'm serious. So my name is Kanani Io Holder. It's an African name.
Okay.
So I'm going to begin. I have some written formal statements here. So we pay taxes. and we pay some of the highest taxes in the country, city, state, federal, right? But I do believe it is taxation without representation. Why? Because we need what I would like to call an anti-racist budget. What does that mean? My money, if we can agree that racism is systemic, then I'm funding my own oppression, right? For example, in education, which is my area of expertise, I learned in the 4th grade that there was an African burial ground. We were taught in the 4th grade that slavery did not happen in New York. It happened down south. I then, as a 5th grade teacher at Harlem Children's Zone, which I became the director of history of, the curriculum didn't change. I was looking at textbooks that still had the same 2 stock paragraphs that I looked at when I was 9 years old myself. And then I got a National Endowment for the Humanities Fellowship to learn about the abolitionist and suffrage movement in New York City, and learned that Brooklyn, Kings County, was a hub of agricultural slavery because the food that was grown in Brooklyn was sent to the rest of the city at that time to eat. So I was 36 years old, learning this in a very elite, right? One of 2 Black out of 36 teachers in this, very fancy, illustrious opportunity. I'm crestfallen. Those streets that are named after slaveholding families, 83 to be exact, those are the streets I grew up on, I played double dutch on, I played hide and go seek in. So I'm forced to still kind of smile and small talk, right? With teachers that looked at this as like a feeding frenzy, pun intended, about how they can change their curriculum. So, and then I wrote about it, and then WNYC did a feature on me about it, because I lived at that time I lived across the street from Ditmas Park, which is fancy now, but at Ditmas is also a slave owner, Cortellia, which is where so that's bizarre. So in terms of we're funding our own systemic racism in that point, right? So I'm funding an education that does not fully explain to people what New York was. New York was the 2nd highest because of Governor Stuyvesant for slavery. Like, he made it the largest slave port outside of Charleston, South Carolina. I see that.
I'm going to have to ask you to end. I apologize. We will come back to you probably during questions if people have questions for you. You did say that you have a written statement.
Oh, I have a whole thing here.
Would you please share that with us?
Oh, most definitely. I'm very excited to. And I also wanted to talk about culture groups, CIGs, and the art funding, and how that also stymies creativity in the city.
Good job.
But we'll take it in the questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Very much appreciate it. Julius, Tajuddin, good to meet you, sir. Please come on up. Tajuddin.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
So I'm just going to cut to the chase. I'm getting the gist of what you're looking for. The definitions in the city charter need to be expanded. So example, gentrification should be defined as a condition brought about by unlawful housing schemes by the government. We throw these terms out and we think that gentrification is a natural thing, but it's not. It's a condition that's brought about by unlawful means. So words that we know should be used in the laws should be used. We use these words a lot in our, governance, but they're not ever in the definitions of the city charter. So we need to have these definitions so everyone can be put on the same page. We're not on the same page. That's it. Some words that are in federal use and overlap in local use need to be defined, like AMI. Now, the policy for AMI, that's used for developers if they want to get the local income housing tax credit. So the federal regions throughout America, they have these AMIs for various districts. Okay, so the policy is that they have to do a certain percentage of low-income housing, and they set that percentage, but they go or lower. See, it's or lower. It's not, they don't lock them in to like this. It could be, or lower, because they know that developers are going to also come to the local governments and try to get something else. See? So they're not going to tie their hands. But we just go, oh, the AMI, we can't change the AMI. You know, that's trying to steer people into false thing. You know, you could say if Donald Trump moved into Harlem, then the AMI of Harlem would be something outrageous, you know? So we set the AMI according to what is going to serve our needs. And then that developer, if he wants to apply for the low income housing tax credit, he does that. But when it comes to us, then we say the AMI is going to be 0.000, you know, whatever of the AMI, but we're doing it to meet our needs. But without this meaning or definition being put, you know, like the city charter should have it explained, because we certainly use it enough, you know, in our dealings, but we try to, like, you know, we know what it really means. And we want to try to make it seem like we can't do anything. You know, go to the federal government, get them to change the AMI. But keep the AMI whatever you want. It could be $1 billion, but we'll just do a certain percentage that will make that housing meet the income targeted income that fits us. But these definitions have to be more expanded. And I think that can solve a lot of problems.
Very much appreciated. Okay. Commissioners, questions? Vice Chair Garrido and then Commissioner Daniels.
I'm sorry, I don't remember the name. I can't pronounce. How do you pronounce your last name, sir? Tashadeen. Sir, the word gentrification doesn't appear in this charter. It does not. It should, but it does not. So I just wanted to point that out to you. I think I kind of understand your point, and this is what we're struggling about, what we want to change here. We have heard multiple testimony with people regarding housing as a right, and how the city, while it's attempting to deal with all of economic forces in various neighborhoods, are creating situations that actually are making the situation worse. So my question to you is this: as a member of this community, are there practical applications of what you're suggesting by the expansion of definition that the commission should be looking into to implement?
Yes.
Can you give me?
Like, you know, we use a lot of terminologies, you know, in our governance, you know, community boards and so forth, but everyone has a different idea of what a word means. And as long as we're not on the same page, you know, confusion can happen, and it does happen. And then we start, you know, blaming different agencies, departments, governments, whatever. So it needs to be more transparency. You know, if we're going to be using words like, you know, like AMI and gentrification and all of that, then, you know, gentrification is a very real thing in housing. So why wouldn't it be, why wouldn't you have a definition of that, you know, in the city charter, so that people would be aware, well, I'm using gentrification like it's a natural thing. It's not natural. It's unlawful. It's a condition that's created by unlawful means. And so people need to know what's lawful, what's unlawful. And if you have the definitions in the city charter expanded, it'll make people more aware. It gives them more insight to what's going on.
Thank you, sir.
Commissioner Favors and then Commissioner Thompson.
Thank you all again for your comments. I'd like to speak to the issue of education, as was referenced by Madame here in the front. I apologize for not recalling your name off the top. Thank you. You mentioned something that seems to be what we call culturally non-responsive education, or education that, as Carter G. Woodson has told us, was in the furtherance of the needs of the descendants of the slave owner and not in furtherance of the needs of the descendants of the enslaved. Do you think it would be helpful for us as commission members to consider having basic standards for education that would be specifically designed to meet the cultural and historically grounded needs of the diverse children within the city of New York, so that you would not have to secure a fellowship of the type that you referenced, would not have to age until 36, would not have to navigate all of these other systemic inequities in order to find out the truth about the very neighborhood in which you live. Would that be advisable in your opinion?
Of course. I also had a fellowship with Coro for educational leadership. And so I met with the COO of the Board of Ed at the time. And he told me what the budget was, $26 billion with a B. And so, you know, when you think about how much money is paid to teachers for toilet paper, for lunch, you know, for all these things, but you don't hear a proactive, systematic way of addressing racial inequity in the curriculum, I question, like, well, again, that's my tax dollars, 8.875 or whatever the tax rate is for everything that I purchased. I'm like, where is my money actually going? We're in the Schomburg right now. Why did he start the Schomburg? Because a teacher told him, you don't have a history in Africa. Your people were nothing, you know, you all were slaves and that was it. That's why he started this institution, which is also underfunded, comparatively speaking to other New York Public Library branches. Again, you know, let's look at the systemic racism in that. So what I always say is racism isn't just emotional, it is economic. And Black children and other children of color in the city need to see themselves on a trajectory of greatness that is outside of the context of whiteness. It cannot just be a curriculum is this freedom fighter and that freedom fighter. It has to be, no, that Africa was started a lot that we now consider to be parts of our civilization, right? The right triangles were in Egypt because there was no way that you could create a pyramid without right triangles, but yet we call it Pythagoras.
Let me just step in here. I could listen to you all night and sit here and
I'm passionate.
And I appreciate that passion, and we need more of it.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, though, we don't have a lot of time right now. and
I
just
did
wanna
want to
make sure
talk about CIGs as well, though.
Here's the deal. Unless we ask you about CIGs, you can't, because then you're bringing in more testimony. So just hold tight. And if someone asks you about CIGs, maybe somebody will do that, but we just got to keep it moving. I hope you
But my
appreciate
answer is yes, we need to proactively create curriculum and safe spaces in our schools and our educational facilities that offer a fount of knowledge outside of the standard curriculum that we have now, which is erasure, and doesn't actually, it's not inclusive.
As a follow-up briefly, because we're also now stepping into state education policy and territory. Would it be advisable for you, because we have tons of curriculum, Black New Yorkers for Educational Excellence, there are tons of organizations that have curriculum, but because that curriculum is not tied to academic testing, it is not actually enforceable, and teachers are not forced to be conversant in those curriculum in order to secure a job. It's not a part of their evaluation. Would it be advisable for you, to the extent that the charter has any input on that, for us to consider that as well? And yes or no is fine. Unfortunately, I do not have the ability to ask about CIGs because we do have to move forward. But would you find that to be advisable as well?
Yeah, and I got a text message from my friend who I text to watch this, I guess, a live stream of it. And I am aware of the fact that curriculum is more state-based, but I also have worked with the DOE before. I have a vendor number. I'm a contractor. So there's a lot of leeway, specifically now with the principal's budget, that they can have discretionary funds. So there are ways, as a teacher, I have seen trainers come in to teach us how to do different things. There's advisory groups. There's ways in which those types of curriculum can be infused into the day-to-day practice and climate within a school without it having to go to the state. Obviously go to the state as well, but that should not be an excuse for schools to not implement that. And I'd also like to say that a lot of times guidance counselors are not promoting HBCUs. I'm a proud graduate of Howard University. They dissuade children from going to HBCUs. They tell them they won't get any funding, that they can't get any scholarships. So all of these are issues just in education that I think, you know, where my taxpayer dollars going. Thank you so much.
These are very good points. We should just note that the New York City Charter does not really speak to, at its core, the Department of Education. So that's just something we also have to look at. And what is the authority of this charter to affect changes in the Department of Education? What must we do to advance changes at the state level? So they just want to make sure everybody understands that. Commissioner Thompson?
Yes, I just wanted to mention that, well, I actually have a question um, that I'll ask last to the speaker from New Orleans. Yes. But I wanted to the school teacher whose name I'm sorry. I wanted the school teacher to know that the city council recently, I believe, gave $10 million to United Way, New York, to work on curriculum change to incorporate history of people of color primarily. And so they are in the process of figuring out how to do that. So I just wanted you to know that because I think they'd love to talk to you. Second, on the housing issue, we've heard arguments to change housing in three ways. One, not tonight, but throughout the last, several hearings. One, to change ownership. So we've heard people say we should have more land trust and other kinds of community ownership as opposed to just selling public property to private developers and others. We've heard arguments that we should regulate land differently. Such as we're hearing tonight around euler and other things, we should regulate it differently. And third, we've heard arguments that there should be more money invested into affordable housing. So those are the three kinds of arguments we've heard. I also wanted just to note that this commission will be issuing a report as well as specific recommendations for changes in the charter. And the report can point to things that go beyond just the city's role. And I just wanted to note that because every year the federal government spends over $200 billion subsidizing home loan mortgages. And the bigger your mortgage, the bigger subsidy you get because it's a flat rate. And so one could argue that every year this federal government spends $200 billion subsidizing gentrification because the wealthier folks get a bigger federal write-off. Those kinds of things we can put in the report as well, because I just want to put it in context. We know that structural racism just doesn't exist at a city level. It is actually part of a larger system of racism that exists in federal policies as well as city policies. So it's okay. We will not forget things, even though they aren't directly things we can move on within the city charter. I just wanted folks to know that so you don't feel like we're just not looking at those things or thinking about them at all.
Right, and I appreciate what Commissioner Thompson is saying. I just want people to be mindful that sometimes you're going to bring forth proposals. And when you get to the November 2022 ballot, you may not see the proposals that you have voiced, the ideas that you voiced in a charter proposal recommendation. And sometimes it will be because we cannot do it in the charter. We can make proposals beyond the charter at the state and the federal level, but we can't do certain things if it's not applicable to the charter or it's not within the authority of the city as the authorities flow down from state and federal bodies. Fair? Okay. Is there anyone else on the commission that has a question for those who've testified? We've got a lot of people to hear from. We don't want to cut anyone off, though. I just want to make sure. Is there anyone else? Okay. I'm going to ask one quick question. And I've got about 45 seconds to ask it. Tell me about CIG.
Yes, I saw the twinkle in your eye, like, yes. All right.
My mother was the first Black woman, first Black person to curate a Fortune 500 corporate art collection after having been told, being raised in Louisville, Kentucky, that a career in the arts was not something that a little Black girl should dream of. And she came to New York and set it on fire. So come on, talk to me about the art.
And that's Faith Ringgold, who also is in Harlem, with her MacArthur Genius Award and everything else that she's done.
Come on, you got 30 seconds.
Yeah, I had to like open up my, oh man, I don't have the statistics.
Just tell me from your head. Tell me.
All right. So I did another fellowship with the Caribbean Culture Center African Diaspora Institute back in about 3 years ago. So I learned about CIGs. So it's about 34 organizations that get a lion's share of all the art funding guaranteed off the top. right? And then you have a lot of the actual community-based organizations, these smaller organizations that are actually on the ground, actually doing the work, providing spaces for people to transmute their pain into power through the arts. And they have to compete for funding. They don't even have money to keep the lights on. They don't have security like the Met does. They don't have color printers even. And they then have to figure out a way to, they might not even be fluent in English, but yet they have to compete for these lower mic, and I've gotten them, Lower Manhattan Culture Council, I've gotten two, but they had to compete for these micro grants, $2,000, and you're competing with other small cultural based institutions. What is that? Like that to me is like, it again, that's where my taxpayer dollars are going, to pit one community-based organization against another for a very small amount of money, and the time that it takes for them to put together a proposal and then be rejected and told no, and then know that there's and literally know that there's people out there in the streets that need the services that they provide.
I think I got it.
Yep,
I got it. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, Madam Chair, we're supposed to take a break, but then I understand that we have like about 9 or 10 other people who want to testify. So maybe perhaps we should continue, but if folks want to step away, please, or should we take a break?
We want to make sure that we hear from everyone and we have the back and forth questions. So
I just want to, can I? 10
sure,
seconds?
we're just, but what, I guess let's just let it be known. We're going to keep working through.
Continue, okay.
If you need to step away, just please do so, commissioners included.
Right.
Commissioner Thompson?
Yeah, I just want to take your SIG comment and add a note just for follow-up that I hear you suggesting the city take a look at equitable SIG funding for communities of color. Okay, I just want to, because I think that is something we can look at. I also want to raise an amendment to that. At one point, Charlie Rangel, when he was head of Ways and Means in the US Congress, said that nonprofits that don't pay taxes, including a lot of very wealthy cultural institutions in New York that don't pay taxes, that is a federal subsidy. He suggested that there be a look at racial equity in the tax status of nonprofits and what are they doing for the public, because that is a massive amount of public subsidy. So I want to add that on, if it's a friendly amendment to you, because I think it's in the same spirit.
There is a, I'm hearing rumblings of a similar debate and a conversation turned debate in some institutions of higher learning, particularly the Ivy League institutions that have significant endowments and are functioning sometimes in cities where the poverty rates are astronomical, getting free, tax-free with growing endowments every single day. So great point to make. Thank you all. We're going to move to the next panel of persons to testify. Thank you, Vice Chair. Vice Chair Garrido has to go tend to his day job, which concerns us all as well. Thank you. All right. The next group of 4 persons that we'd like to come forward to testify are Catherine Giscombe, Joan Balsaridia, and again, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing your name. I'm asking you to come over here down to your right. Catherine Giscombe, Joan Balsarida, excuse me, Giovanna Luizo, forgive me, and Alpheus Marcus. When you come forward, I've likely mispronounced your name, and I apologize, and just please correct me. So the first person, Catherine Giscombe, please come forward.
Hi, thank you for hearing my comments. I'm Catherine Giscombe, and I've lived in West Harlem for about the last 8 years. And I'm also a new member of Community Board 10. So the story or the anecdote that I shared was that an acquaintance of mine was stopped by the police in the subway station at 127th and St. Nicholas Avenue. He was charged with jumping the turnstile. And this is an Asian man who lives on 127th Street. And he was given a citation. And I don't think that he was like hauled away at that point, but it was a completely false charge. And he was able to, with his Metro card, prove that he had not in fact jumped the turnstile. But the fact that the police completely fabricated that event was extremely disturbing. I know that police violence is endemic in New York City. This is really just one of many examples. And I just wanted to share that. If the charter in fact has language around some type of control of the police, I think that would be a very, very important part of the charter for you to address. And I mean, again, this is just one example. And as we know, there've been very deadly confrontations between especially African Americans, people of color, and the police. But again, if it's part of the charter, that would be great if you could address that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The next person to testify is Joan Balsaridia. And again, correct me on pronunciation.
Good evening. It's Joan Bakreddin.
Oh, I'm loving it. Okay, give it to me again.
Okay.
Joan
Bakreddin.
Bakredia.
Bakreddin?
Bakreddin.
Yes.
Oh, I'm
yes.
thinking I've got an A here. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Good evening, everyone. My name is Joan Alexander Bakreddin, and I came to the Racial Justice Commission input session to represent the Coalition for the Flatbush African Burial Ground at Bedford and Church Avenues in Brooklyn. I believe our recommendation to amend the New York City Charter is representative of all people of African descent, if not all New Yorkers, including those who struggle to preserve the new Harlem African Burial Ground. We recommend that a section be added to the city charter containing specific rules and procedures for city government's formal response whenever an African burial ground is known to exist at a specific or approximate site, or when evidence of a burial ground is discovered. If such New York City rules existed today, the Coalition for the Flatbush African Burial Ground would not be struggling to protect that sacred land from further desecration by builders at 2286 Church Avenue in Flatbush, Brooklyn. If such a city charter section existed from 2009 to 2019, the Harlem African Burial Ground supporters would not have struggled unsuccessfully to preserve from private construction the historic burial ground and church site for free and enslaved Africans at what has become the East 126th Street MTA bus depot. Nationwide, other jurisdictions are writing laws such as that which we are recommending for the New York City Charter now. A national conference on this topic is being convened in October 2021. New York City already is known to have the largest African burial ground in the United States and a notorious history on how government treats that site before a long struggle by African descendants and others worldwide to save it from further desecration and to honor it. Let us not continue to abuse sacred ground by building housing and other such constructs on identified sites that otherwise can be used for educational, cultural, and memorial purposes, which can begin to undo the psychological impact on Africans of having been stolen from their home roots and then access here to their ancestors' resting places. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Giovanna Lioso, help me. I'm failing over here, but you're going to help me.
Hi, yes, my name is Giovanna Liuza. Thank you.
Not too bad. Thank you.
Yes. Hello, and thank you for having us. My name is Giovanna. I'm a political science student and a more recent New York City resident, and I'm here with Cop Watch Patrol Unit. For my first week of arriving in New York City, moving here from Florida, I've witnessed police brutality like I've never seen before. When I came to the city and fell in love, my life changed as I began to witness my proudly Puerto Rican partner face targeting and violence by the local police force, which has been a constant in their life growing up in this city. Why do we believe in, and most importantly, fund with our tax money, a carceral state, when we see what it does to our loved ones, our bodies, our minds, and our checkbooks? When we talk about racial inequity, income gaps, and redistribution of wealth and resources comes to mind. For example, the NYPD has an $11 billion budget, yet New York City public schools are holding fundraisers for school supplies, and many people are criminalized for sleeping on the streets due to houselessness during this pandemic. Our tax dollars pay police lawsuit settlements while this happens. We should not have to pay for their attacks against our own people, and we need to end qualified immunity from a legal standpoint to promote transparency and tangible recourse. If we stop being complacent in institutions lining the pockets of politicians while neglecting our children and siblings, if we stop funneling money into political campaigns that run on empty promises and fall apart, if we choose to face where the money allocated to jails, prisons, and police is really going, like how prison labor is perpetuated by public universities and state programs, and if we instead have more conversations like this one today, centering youth voices about what folks need in the community and how to provide for them, we can get better on track. I wonder why we seem to organize around pain and tragedy a lot more than we strategically move around promoting resources, pleasure, love, and care into our communities that need it the most. If we acknowledge people are desensitized to violence, why do we use violent tragedies as a means to motivate people for political action and change? I'm here to say that the youth voice and perspective is a crucial piece of solving this puzzle. We have many youth members a part of CPU, Cop Watch Patrol Unit, because we recognize that the police do not protect us or keep us safe, but rather plant more crime into our communities that deepens systemic racism, separates families, and polarizes our people. Addressing these injustices starts with holding criminal cops accountable for their actions and eliminating room for malpractice. This means getting cops and RSOs out of our schools. This also means ending qualified immunity. You can learn more about our work at Cop Watch Patrol Unit online or by watching Cop Watch America on BET or other streaming services. I'd like to leave you with this image. Last night while on Cop Watch Patrol, and where we observed multiple illegal checkpoints that night, an officer smugly told us to go pay attention to the gun and gang violence happening in the city, to which a community member replied, "We see a lot of cops enacting that same violence. It's you, the police, who are the biggest gang in all of New York." Why do we continuously fund and uphold such a detrimental and lethal power as the NYPD? And how can this charter stand to refocus the budget and dismantle the state's notions of qualified immunity? Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The next person, Alpheus Marcus.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Alpheus Marcus. I'm a community advocate. I'm also a candidate here for New York City City Council. One of the issues that I would like for the charter to address is the fact that District 5 here, as well as all other urban communities, the school systems have been failing our children. The Department of Education makes up 28% of the city's budget. The New York Department of Education has a budget of $34 billion, $17 billion that goes into capital finance. The other $17 billion goes into operational. One of the problems that we've witnessed is the fact that the tier system that the teachers unions have isn't sending qualified teachers into our communities. What I would like to put in place or have the charters put in place is a law or a provision where they must reveal their salaries across the board so that all schools can get funding equally. I've worked with, at the time, Richard Carranza in desegregating the schools, but it seems that this here is a continuing problem, especially within our communities. Some of the failing school districts, as I said, are predominantly communities of color. Here in District 5, it's been failing for over 36 years and nobody said anything. I would like for a provision to desegregate the schools to take place, preferably between this administration's last days or the next administration. Thank you.
Very helpful. Thank you, sir. All right, I am going to turn to our commissioners to see if they have questions for the panelists. We'll begin with Commissioner Davey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this is for the first speaker who commented, second speaker who commented on the situation with her friend in the subway in terms of the encounter with officer of the NYPD. And I do want to say that there was a charter change about 3 or 4 charter votes ago that allows the Civilian Complaint Review Board to investigate the very kind of thing that you have raised. So Madam Chair, I don't know if it's appropriate, but maybe I'll do this at the end. But there is a process already in existence that came as a result of the charter change that the friend of our speaker can use in order to have his situation
So
addressed.
I'm going to ask you, just in case, there are people who are listening, if you can tell us it in like, the next like 90 seconds.
Sure. So it's real quick. So the charter was changed to allow the Civilian Complaint Review Board to investigate false official statements that police officers make in the process of dealing with the public. So if your friend or anyone would file a complaint with the Civilian Complaint Review Board, then the charter gives the Civilian Complaint Review Board the authority to address that issue. So that's the point one. The other point I want to make with regard to police, as it has to do with this commission, is that I'd encourage the second speaker and any others to take a good look at the city charter as it currently exists in relation to the NYPD, in relation to the Civilian Complaint Review Board, and suggest changes to this commission where you think civilian oversight of the department would be strengthened. That will help us do our job better when it comes to ensuring accountability and hopefully eventually trust in the disciplinary process when it comes to the NYPD. If there are other issues that you have that are related to the NYPD that you think can be addressed through charter change or through other suggestions you might have, please share those as well. We have the testimony today, but I'd encourage you to take a look at the charter as well and make specific recommendations about what kind of charter changes might strengthen the public's control over how policing happens in New York City. Thank you, Madam Chair.
It would also be good if there were some preventative steps that could be taken with training of the police.
Thank you. Very much appreciated. Other questions? Commissioner Thompson?
So for the African burial ground, noted, I just want to say thank you. I said this earlier, I don't know if you were here. This commission really is trying to, I know you framed it in terms of a policy for all burial grounds, but something like this doesn't have to wait till 2022. And there is something called a task force on racial inclusion and equity, newyorkcity.gov/TRIE, TRIE. I suggest you take that to that commission right away. Okay. Because this is something they can focus on right away. Was it Louisa who spoke second from Florida?
Uh-huh.
I'm Giovanna. Hi.
What's your name?
Giovanna.
Here you go.
How did I get it so wrong?
Thank you.
Okay.
Hi.
All right. So first of all, thank you for being so brave. I love the fact that you as a young person starting school come up here and really sock it to us. I like that. I just want to say, keep that up. We need that. And you said you came to New York and fell in love. I don't know if you fell in love with the city or your boyfriend. I was hoping it was the city, but I suspect it might have been your boyfriend. But one thing you said really intrigued me, and that is, why shouldn't we have imagination? Why shouldn't we think about how to create more joy and more love in New York City? And I think that's an intriguing thing to think about. And what occurred to me is the federal government is talking about maybe $4 trillion to redo infrastructure and to redo care or develop a care economy or something. And so I'm wondering what you think of the idea that if there was a agency or body created to continue the fight for racial justice in New York, which is something we've been talking about and hearing about. Do you think such a body should actually work on an agenda for what should happen with new infrastructure money, new Federal Care Act money, like that it should actually engage the public in coming up with ideas for how to use these resources to create more joy, more love, more togetherness in New York City? Is that the kind of thing that you'd like to see happen? Because I just found that intriguing.
Sure, thank you for that suggestion. I see that building intergenerational relationships is a huge part of the solution, and within that, centering youth voices especially. I'm so happy to see so many wonderful folks who I'm sure have lived here much longer than myself come out tonight, though I don't see as many young people here, except for, you know, some of my friends that I came with, who I work with. So I certainly think that making sure that Black and Brown youth are a part of the conversation, not just a part of the conversation, but are the conversation, is the way to move forward. Thank you.
Commissioner Daniel Favors.
Thank you for your comments. In my day job at the Center for Law and Social Justice, one of the things that we have been researching is the existence of culturally specific policing, independent policing alternatives. These are alternatives that exist within a variety of religious minority communities across the city. Some of them are partially funded with city dollars, but they essentially work as a uniformed alternative for these communities who have chosen, for whatever reason, to not engage with NYPD at the same level. By interest of full disclosure, Cop Watch is a program that I've been a part of through Malcolm X grassroots movement years and years and years ago. I ask the following question, and I would just like your opinion and your insight on that. Would you think that if there were a body that were established on a more permanent basis that sought to really enshrine and institutionalize a drive and a pursuit towards equity, would you think that in response to specifically to the incident you mentioned with the police who were going in this back and forth with you and your colleagues, would you find it advisable for other communities that have had disparate, let's just say very negative interactions with the police to be similarly supplied with resources, training, and materials so that those communities, while we are, yes, working on police reform, which is indeed a 400-year process, would you find it advisable for this body to perhaps provide similar resources and training for other communities that, while are eager about police reform, recognize that in the immediacy of now, something more rapid should happen to respond in a way that doesn't require us to continue to depend on an agency that has historically not been one that sees our humanity? What are your thoughts on that?
Sure, thank you. Just for clarification, I'd like to ask you, by training, what does that entail? Do you mean training as in training folks to understand what cop watching means and how the tools that we can use to hold criminal cops accountable? Or, you know, what exactly do you mean by this training?
It would be something of that nature, but something that also would look to establish independent capacity for communities to develop their own alternatives to policing. That would be within the confines that we would leave that up to the community. This is purely hypothetical, but something that that community would then be able to create, that they too would be able to have an alternative to NYPD. While we're working on that as a very long-term project, we have these thriving examples of religious minorities that are able to establish these types of functions. They have their own number. You can call that number instead of 911. They have their own cars, their own training schedule, their own patrol routes, and this is something that they are able to manage in a way that is culturally responsive to them.
Yes, thank you for that clarification. I definitely see that as a potential solution. I think that when we take the power into our own hands as people and we don't rely on conversations about how to work with the state or how to have conversations about better to engage with each other, and we recognize that, you know, these need to be separate processes, that abolition and reform are separate, I think that's the way forward. So yeah, I'd be very interested in learning more about a kind of independent program that doesn't use the same tools and the same weapons and the same strategies that the carceral and police state does.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there others? Questions? All right. Well, we thank you for your testimony. Very much appreciated. The next three persons that we ask come forward are Timothy Harrell, Roth Madanels, and Jose LaSalle. Timothy Harrell, Roth Madanels, You know what? What's happening with me is I'm gonna blame some of the people who are writing your names down because I got an O up here instead of a U. So that's a no, right? That's not me.
I can confirm.
Thank you, Ruth. So Timothy Harrell, Ruth Medanos, and you'll help me on that last name, and Jose LaSalle. Please come forward, Timothy Harrell.
Yeah, my last name is Harrell.
Harrell.
Yes.
Yes. Uh-huh.
How are you today?
Good.
Good to see you, young man, as always. Really quick.
I had to look over to see who was the young man up here.
So when I heard about this meeting, 'cause a friend of mine gave me the invite, Harold Miller. So I said, I wanted to come out. I actually am here representing the Black Opportunity Project, which is a community-based organization that fights for social and economic justice in the community. And when I heard what the topic was, the first thing that hit my mind was actually policing of Black and Brown communities. Whereas I moved through Harlem, I moved through parts of Brooklyn, East New York, Brownsville, where there happens to be a lot of NYCHA developments, even on the east side of Harlem. I always see it seems like the police are occupying the community. They're not really moving around. They're like pretty much stationed inside these NYCHA developments. And when you look at the data, it looks like there's this mass amount of crime going on in Black and Brown communities. And it will reflect that if that's the only place that I'm sitting, that's the only place that I'm policing. So then, of course, majority of the arrests are going to take place in these neighborhoods. And it's going to look like crime is not taking place or that it's low in areas like Park Slope or in Sunset Park, for example, right? So for a while, I did live in Park Slope, and I have family that actually lives further, a couple of avenues over in Wyckoff houses and Gowanus. And from where I left at on 3rd Street and 5th Avenue, when I crossed over 2 avenues from 4th Avenue and hit 3rd Avenue, the very same police car that I would see that drove past me on 5th Avenue that didn't say anything to me now wanted to stop me 2 avenues over and ask me where I was coming from or where I was going, right? And I think that when, I know some changes have been made with police reform and a lot more powers have been given to agencies like the CCRB, but I think that the CCRB's hands are still tied because even though as much information as you can give to the public to advise them that if they should have a negative encounter or an encounter that they don't feel comfortable with the NYPD, they could come to the CCRB. But as history has shown, the final say is with the police commissioner, and he has continually gone against the recommendations for disciplinary actions made by the CCRB, right? So one suggestion that you made, you gave an example of, I see that taking place in Jewish communities like Crown Heights, and even for the little 2 or 3 blocks they have over here on 181st in Amsterdam, by that little yeshiva, and they're policing their own communities. Again, something else taken from another group of people, taken from the Black Panther Party, from another group of people. Someone was talking about education, and we're talking about cure violence programs. So I just wanted to, I'm going to end very quickly. I just wanted to point out that if people don't have an identity, or if they're operating off a broken identity, I'm going to wind it down, then you're going to see them behaving in an erratic manner, right? So if you always tell people,
hold it until we get to question and answer.
Sorry,
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.
Very much appreciated. The next person, Ruth? Ruth. Yes. Ruth.
Hello.
Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for coming to my neighborhood. I live around the corner. I also was a candidate for city council in this last election. And I'm coming here because I'm a parent. I'm a parent of a returning citizen. The reason why I ran for city council. We use a lot of sexy terminology here. Colonizer conversation, gentrification, AMI. Those are nice terms. I call them Black code laws. Black code laws affect specific people, Black people. They have laws in place to keep our people homeless. We keep talking about the rent's too high. The rent's too high nationally. We got to pinpoint it. Why is the rent too high? People don't make enough money. So what? People don't make enough money. People ain't been making enough money. But the reality is in this district, where 1 in 3 households are affected by incarceration, even if the rent was $75, the majority of people couldn't get a home. They couldn't afford a home because of criminal history background checks. They have legislation in both state and federal. Parole says a felon cannot come home and reside in an apartment with another felon. So if I'm a mother, which I am, with a returning citizen, which I am, but I don't have another felon, and I had another child who was a felon who came home, I would have to make a decision as to what child I could take and what child I couldn't take. Imagine that. So now after that, I have to make that decision. Suppose I'm savvy enough to say, take this $7,000 and go get an apartment. They can't even go get an apartment because they have legislation that allows the landlords to do a criminal background check. So now if you paid your debt to society and you come home and you're expected to come into society, the first thing you have to secure is housing. So now if you can't secure that and you don't have a family member who has a home who can take you in, and it has to be a home because it can't be an apartment because you have to be added to the lease, could take you in, what happens to you? You have to go to the shelter. Then you have to navigate that terrain and that dysfunction and say you're going to get on your feet and get a job. We have to stop talking as though we don't understand what's happening here. Systemic racism is real. It's about Black people, specifically designed to keep us living in the streets. That's right. Specifically designed to make us take drugs because we just can't take it anymore. Because it's not all right. And I got to numb this pain. How do I numb the pain? So I shoot a little dope. I sniff a little coke. I do whatever. Just let me take this off my mind. I need you to fix that. Thank you.
Very much appreciated. Thank you. Jose LaSalle, please come forward.
Yeah, how you doing? My name is Jose LaSalle. I'm the founder of Cop Watch Patrol Units, which we've been for the past 11.
Sorry, say it again. Cop.
My name is Jose LaSalle. I'm the founder of Cop Watch Patrol Unit, which is a group that's been monitoring police since 2011. And we have collected thousands of videos. We use social media to expose and kind of give people an inside look of what happens in community of color when it comes to policing and how aggressive policing is in community of color compared to a white community and other communities. And we have been doing this for a while. And the thing that we haven't seen is really any change in the police department. With all the reform that exists, with all the with the CCRB, which is limited on what they could do, with the Internal Fair Bureau, which is basically policing themselves, and really no change has come about dealing with police. Now, right now we have 5 cases, because we also take cases. We have 5 cases that we're dealing with where 4 women was punched in the face. And then 1 case where a male was also punched in the face. Now, this happened within the last month. So what I'm trying to say is that I respect what the commission had done, giving the CCRB a little more strength to be able to stretch their arm a little longer, but their bite does not bring any fear or any change within the police department, because all they could do is make a recommendation, and the recommendation always gets shut down by the commissioner here or any NYPD commissioner that's there. So this is an issue that has continued, and I've been living in Harlem for 48 years. So this issue has been continuing since my 51 years in this alive. And the situation that we need to deal with is try to figure out how to be able to speak about it and not be afraid to speak about it, because every time a police issue comes up or we speak about police brutality, a lot of time people, especially in a commission board like this and other boards, are afraid to say anything against the NYPD. So they try to water it down, or they try to circumvent around it in a way that is not saying, yes, there is a lot of issues in the police department. There is a lot of problems in the police department. It's not just a few rotten apples. It's a lot of rotten apples. And now with us having the ability to be able to look up a police badge in 58, we able to look up 58.org, we able to look up police badge and see how many allegations these police officers have. Out of every 9 to 10 officers that we look at, the majority of them have allegations. This for us is a pattern of criminal behavior, and we need to do something to check it. Thank you.
It's very helpful. Thank you. Thank you all. Commission members, any questions? Commissioner Davey and then Commissioner Favors.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm not quite sure how to put this in the form of a question, but I do want to sort of address a number of the issues that have been raised around the NYPD and CCRB, but the NYPD more generally, and again, to encourage our speakers to actually both work to look at what charter adjustments can be made to address the issues that you have, because that's the purpose of this commission, and what recommendations that you can make so that when this body issues a report, your recommendations are possibly in that report. But let me just sort of try to just clear up a couple of things as we think about what kind of charter reform we need. One of the things that we could think about, let me put it in the form of a question, would it be worthwhile thinking about how you get a civilian oversight agency, in this case CCRB, final authority on CCRB's cases, just on the CCRB cases alone? Would that be helpful? Right now, CCRB has a memorandum of understanding with the commissioner that if CCRB makes a determination that's consistent with the guidelines, only in extraordinary circumstances will the commissioner overturn it. That's only been in place for about 7 or 8 months, and it's being evaluated. More to be said on that. But so the question is, would final authority in the hands of a civilian oversight agency begin to answer that question? So that's one. So in terms of not a few bad apples, but a whole system, and Madam Chair, you can interrupt me if I sort of step outside the lines, but it seems to me that we can come, so let me put it another way. You can propose alternatives for policing of neighborhoods that, as has been suggested, and propose those to this body for this body to consider, and perhaps consider including it in its report. That's probably not a charter change, but it's something that can be proposed, that can be considered. But it seems to me that the challenge with the system is not that you got a bunch of bad cops. I don't believe that. I don't think the facts bear that out. What I do know is that you have cops who are bad that a system spends a lot of time protecting, to the detriment of the citizens of the city and the other officers in the police department. So the system does get corrupted by trying to protect bad officers. And that's what we have to address. That's what we've been trying to address. And so I would ask it, well, I would encourage more specific recommendations for how we address that. And then, Madam Chair, my final thing, and I'll stop, is to address the issue of returning citizens. And the only thing I'd love to preach a sermon on this, but I won't. But what we do to returning citizens is atrocious. It's still an outrage. We've made some changes and some progress. So I'm going to hear you as encouraging this commission to think of ways to engage experts on returning citizens so that we can look at both structural issues that this commission can address, and then other sort of more programmatic things that we might suggest that other administrations can suggest to relieve some of the burden that returning citizens face when they come home after they've paid their debt. It is outrageous. That's not a question, but it is outrageous what we're doing. I completely agree with you, and I appreciate your encouraging us to look at these issues to see how we can address them as a part of our process. Thank you, Madam Chair.
So I thank you, Commissioner Davey, for your your responsive remarks. And I just want to say to the panelists that I echo your concerns, and I echo the comments that were provided, that were expressed by Commissioner Davey. What I hear, and I'm going to give this to you because I want you to tell me if I'm hearing you correctly. What I'm hearing is that we need to, as a commission, center on what allows for racist practice in policing, bad cop or otherwise. And that we also, and we need to address discipline and excessive use of force and more, but at its core, what allows for racism in policing to begin with? And secondly, I'm centering on how our society deals with and addresses persons who become justice involved. And what I'm going to tell you is that I hear you talk about how we engage with persons who are, the terms that are used, returned citizens, re-entering society. But I guess what I'm hearing is that we need to, even at a more kind of fundamental core level, think about how we as a society look upon and engage with persons who become justice involved, because the treatment does not just begin. The harsh treatment, the inhumane engagement of persons who've been justice involved does not just begin when they return home. It begins the minute they become incarcerated. And for some, it begins just by virtue of the fact of being of color and being poor. So that's what I'm hearing, or that's where I'm going with it. And I just want a response to that.
Well, you said several things that ring true.
Mm-hmm.
But I need you to understand the focal point. We're fooling ourselves if we believe that America cares about housing everyone. They have legislation in place to allow people to remain homeless, specifically Black people. We're talking about a big picture, rent and things like that, but the picture is smaller than that. It's finer than that. It's racist if you have no place to live because you're Black, and laws make it that way. We have to stop the leak. Okay.
I actually think we're saying the same thing.
Yeah, okay. Stopping the leak.
Right. We're like not just plugging the leak.
Right. Stopping it.
But,
because they'll keep coming home and they'll keep being homeless.
Right.
We'll never stop it if we don't.
Yes, we're on the same page. Okay, I appreciate it. Commissioner Daniel Favors, and then Commissioner Thompson.
So once again, thank you all for your commentary. I'm reminded that I was recently taught that when we say an apple spoils a bunch, the bunch is itself spoiled. There is no removing of the apple and preserving the bunch, because that process has already been interrupted. So I thank you for framing it the way that you did. As it pertains to engaging in paradigm shifting structural conversations, one of the things that, at least in my experience with this body, that has become clear is that we often talk about what Black and Brown communities do not have, what they lack in terms of housing, social services, healthcare, education, so on and so forth. We rarely ask ourselves, what is it about the system that allows our white brothers and sisters to overconsume and to take up more than their fair share of resources? And so having that sort of a paradigm shift in my own head is how I'm approaching this issue that the both of you raised as it pertains to policing. When you talked about the fact that oftentimes commissions are not willing to engage in bold reform, I just want to get a gauge and make sure that I'm hearing what you are saying in a way that I think might make sense, at least as I continue to participate in the body. We have the ability to measure implicit bias now. It was all the rage, measuring implicit bias, testing. A few years ago, Harvard puts out this test. It's wonderful. We can determine how much bias one might have. When we're thinking about structural solutions, whether this is something that is able to be contained in the charter or just in the report that would ultimately come forward, are you thinking along the terms of something like testing or evaluating implicit bias levels within police units to determine if you measure above a certain level of bias as against Black people, for example, that you cannot be allowed to patrol in a Black community? If you demonstrate a particular level of implicit bias or racist animus against Latino communities, you would not be allowed to be able to patrol or be a part of a precinct that was based in a community of that makeup. Is that the type of solution that you're thinking we should be more bold about, or am I undershooting? Am I overshooting? What are your thoughts about that?
So when you speak about testing people in the police department, I think that now, at the time that we are now, that would kind of be a waste of time, because now the majority of people that are committing these police brutality, the majority of officers are committing these atrocities against people of color now are people of color.
But to be clear, I fully understand that. And I think that I still ask the same question, because as I understand it as a practitioner, police bias is not about the race of the officer. It is about the perceived value of the race of the person that is being policed.
And I believe that they already have a curriculum or a template made that they have to follow the rules of their superiors, who the majority of them are white officers. And there has to be somewhere along the line where they're disciplined for them not to, if they decide to say, well, I'm not going to stop that Black person because he really ain't do nothing wrong, and I'm not going to follow the order, that they will not be held accountable for that some kind of way, that the commission could have some kind of saying in it, because they probably won't have the power to control what goes on in the police department. That's why we do what we do, because people like yourself and others do not be in this community the way we are. I have chapters in 5 boroughs. I patrol all 5 communities: Staten Island, Queens, Brooklyn, and basically we patrol every precinct. So we're gathering evidence and videos from every precinct. And we want people to see what goes on in these places, because many people, even in the CCRB, many the chairs on the CCRB, many of y'all don't see this because y'all not in these communities every single day. Just coming through the community, you're not going to have the ability to see what's happening. Now that we have the ability to have video cameras, I came from a time where, I mean, the first thing I had was a beeper, and that was the happiest thing in the world. I was like, I thought I was the biggest thing there was. And now us having the ability to have these cell phones has given us that power to be able to not depend on government and depend on certain commission and CCRB and IAB. Now we're able to do our own investigation, because now we're able to gather this proof, and we have social media that we're able to put it out there and let the world see. And that's how things go viral. And then that's how things get questioned. And that's when the investigation begins, when the system is put out there to the point where they have to give an answer of why this officer went rogue out of nowhere after they holding a woman down, all the officers, he just decides to punch in the face. Why? So if there is some kind of testing that would be able to see why these officers act that way towards people of color, which we know a lot of it has to do with racism, and then we could have that type of test. But the problem that I see with these tests is that, one, are y'all going to be able to even implement them into the police department rules and regulation or their NYPD patrol guidelines? because there's going to be so many obstacles. Every reform took years to take place.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to jump in here. These are very important points that are being raised. We're just 15 minutes shy of our closing time, and we have two more people that from whom we need to hear. We want to give them their time. So we will, I mean, this is not the end of this conversation. Policing is a critical issue that we have to continue to address. So I just want you to know that ending this conversation is not because we do not value it, but we just have to keep moving.
Can I have just 10 seconds? 10 seconds.
You can have, I'm gonna look at this clock over here. I'm gonna give you 15 seconds.
Okay, great. So I just want to follow suggestion and recommend that the CCRB be given more autonomy or more independence separate from the NYPD as it stands in its suggestions or in as far as disciplinary actions. And also, I think that the charter should look at the way NYPD is deployed throughout the city and communities.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to just end it there, and we'll talk more about it. And if you are willing to stay around when we end, then we can talk more specifically about that. I want to make sure that the remaining two persons have their time. Commissioner Thompson, is there anything that you want to say?
I just want to say to Ruth, I didn't get your last name, McDaniels, that
it says McDaniels, so I'm sorry, my dear. I'm sorry. Like, I know McDaniel, forgive me.
That this is not the last public hearing we're going to have. And I think the issue you raised, two things you raised. One, I want to assure you that we hear you when you say 1 in 3 households are justice involved. We hear you when you say there's deep racism. Slavery was incarceration of every Black person. Segregation was modified incarceration of Black people. And so you can't do that for 350 years and not have white people think Black folks belong in jail or belong under some form of supervision. Heard you. Just want to acknowledge. I went to a prison in Alameda County, California, where every prisoner is trained on how to do green retrofits of buildings. So when they leave prison, they actually have very in-demand marketable skills. And the whole prison is off the grid because they've made the prison a job training site with really good training. Point is, this commission could consider mandating workforce training as an example for people who are incarcerated. That's the kind of thing. I only say this to say, I'd like you to talk to other people and come back to us with your ideas about what can we do to help the returning citizen. Not now, because we're out of time, but I'd like you to come to future sessions with proposals so we can write them down and consider them.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Ruth McDaniel. Very much appreciated. All right, we've got two more persons from whom we want to hear this evening and have an opportunity to engage in dialogue with. They are Brandon Bridget and Chanel Washington. And as Brandon Bridget comes forward and Chanel Washington, I just want to take a minute to thank Chanel Washington, who I understand is with the NAACP and helped us to coordinate this evening's gathering here in Harlem. So thank you, Chanel Washington. Brandon?
Hello, good afternoon, good evening, actually. My name is Brandon Bridget. I am a resident of East Harlem, have been for the last 24 years of my life. And I have been a cop watcher, I am an EMT, and I'm a grassroots organizer. So I've been serving this movement in all three of those capacities, and I've seen many different things. And something that plagues me a lot is, I heard it mentioned earlier, is Black youth are not in the rooms where it happens, right? They're not in this room right now, right? You know, you could count on one hand how many Black youth you see in this room right now, right? But the Black youth are the ones that are being impacted the most, because when y'all are gone and y'all try to pass the torch to us, we don't have the necessary resources and skills to carry it on. So I want to jump right into what I'm about to speak about. So the issue in the CCRB kind of got phased out, but I want to bring it back up, right? You see, I've understood the police department from many different standpoints, as I used to be a youth explorer, right? Now I'm a complete abolitionist and don't believe in the power of police at all. All right. So what I'm finding is when people go to the CCRB to make these complaints, the CCRB makes it so difficult. They make it so difficult for those people to bring those complaints forward. And what happens is when you pull up an officer's record on CAPSTAT or 50A, you see a lot of those complaints go unsubstantiated or uncooperative because the CCRB has made it very, very difficult for those complaints to go through. Right? So now what's happening is these officers actually are guilty of these charges, but they're being dropped because the agency that has been charged with holding these officers accountable is not doing their job properly. Right? So what do you do when you have an agency that is representing police officers, right? Excuse me, when you have an agency that is looking into police officers and investigating them, but it seems like they're on the police's side. Yeah? So you know, there's a greater issue here, and I haven't heard it mentioned tonight, but one of the biggest sharks in the game of defending police is actually their unions, right? When you talk about Pat Lynch, when you talk about Ed Mullins, when you talk about the LBA, the DEA, the CEA, and all of these unions that represent these uniformed officers on the street, what happens is when an officer gets in trouble, the first thing that the supervisor tells them to do is get your union delegate, and now they're being shielded by the union and they never truly get held accountable. So what we need to do is we need to abolish police unions, we need to get rid of the police unions and actually hold these officers accountable. I'm tired of seeing people like myself walk out into the street. Sometimes I wear a bullet-resistant vest because I'm aware of the threat that I pose to the police. I charge every single one of you on this commission to truly hold the police in this city accountable. Thank you.
Chanel Washington.
I don't know. Do we have to wear a mask to the mic?
It's your prerogative.
Good evening. My name is Chanel Washington. Currently, I am the chair of housing for Mid-Manhattan. Titles change on me all the time. So
Mid-Manhattan
branch, NAACP branch, yes. So this resolution was already passed by the executive board and also on Community Board 10. It is now in the executive board on Community Board 10, but it has been passed in the Housing Committee by the Housing Chair in support of this resolution. This resolution has to do with real estate appraisal reform. So I know there's a lot of conversation about real estate taxes, and I get the taxes issue. However, we have a deep issue in real estate appraisals. Who has been putting the values on these properties since the beginning of time? And who are these appraisers and what do they look like? And are there Black ones somewhere in there? These are questions that should be asked. I'm just going to pull up something really quick before I read the actual resolution. So is there a relationship between gentrification and real estate appreciation? In order to find out if there's a correlation between the two, data must be obtained. First, we should take a look at the appraisal industry. Who are the appraisers that place the values on the real estate property? What is the procedure to qualify someone as an appraiser? And is this procedure equally accessible to all ethnicities, genders, cultures, and race? The answer to these questions will provide us with a better position to determine who or what is responsible for the segregation and growing appreciation rates that lead to gentrification occurring in our current communities. I'm just going to pause there because we have a situation where, like in neighborhoods like Strivers Road, things like that, you'll see that those properties are not appreciating at the same value as their counterparts downtown, where they have similar amenities, but the properties are appreciating at a much faster rate than those who exist here in Harlem. And then on another note, on the flip side, in terms of our less unfortunate folks who are renting, right, we are seeing massive displacement behind this, because now we want to jack up the value so that these people can't afford to live here, right? Even if you jack up the value to a property that is owned by someone, right, that affects the next property next to them. that may be a rental. So now the rentals go up because now that landlord's going to say their property taxes is going up, blah, blah, blah. So values are affecting everyone. I don't care if you own property or you don't. Values affect everyone. It is the lay of the land of this country. It is how appraisers have been able to segregate this country for I don't know how long now. So my question to you guys are you guys willing to definitely partner and assist with NAACP and figuring out how do we get to this core problem? Because we do know that if you pay property taxes, right, then that money goes to our public schools, our police, our
Let me just interject here.
health.
Let me
I'm
just
sorry.
interject.
Okay.
Time has run out. You've helped us, so I'm going to give you a minute, but you've got just 1 minute, and I'd ask you to submit the resolution to us.
Yes, so I've already submitted to Harold.
Okay, good deal.
So he has it. I told him, he said that he was going to forward to the commission.
Okay, good deal.
So you guys have the resolution. There's also a write-up piece that I wrote in 2017 for Community Board 10 when I sat on the housing committee for that. But I just want to say and complete the point that I was making before, that we really need to look into this issue. So I would like to know if you guys would like to partner or work somehow to figure out how do we get to the bottom of this? How do we deal with property taxes before even dealing with the values that are going to be used to assess the property tax?
Good deal. So I'm going to jump right in here and say to you that I want to thank you for raising the issue. And we are going to delve into it. And then as we are seeking to understand and learn more, we may likely turn to you. Thank you very much. Commission members, questions? Commissioner Thompson.
To the last speaker, I just want to say, I've said this twice, but I don't know if you were here. I'm not sure the commission is really set up to work with the NAA around a specific issue like this, because this commission is set up to look at charter reform issues, and I don't know if this is charterable or not. I don't know. However, there is something the city set up, of which I'm one of the co-chairs, called Task Force for Racial Inclusion and Equity. The housing commissioner is a part of it. Louise Carroll, we will work with you and take up this issue. And the city does a lot of business with appraisal companies, and this is something that is within the city's domain. There's something we can work on together. So TRIE, if you go on nyc.gov/TRIE, you can email Sadia Sherman, who's the executive director. We'll set up a meeting. We'll get the housing department involved and lawyers involved, and we'll work with you on that.
Okay. And I just want to quickly on that point, I want to tell you just a little bit how we're thinking about the issues that you all presented, because excellent points, excellent questions, thoughts being raised throughout the conversation here tonight and in the other boroughs. Sometimes there's not a direct correlation, like just an exacting correlation or a provision in the charter that speaks exactly to what you're talking about. But what we're centering now on is the underlying issues. And so when you talk about appraisals and the inequity that presents in appraisals that leads to inequitable determinations about, values of property, what we're going to do is center on what makes that possible. And so we're going to look at things like, who certifies and licenses appraisers, and what is the equity or the inequity in that, and how does that attach to the charter? So we may not exactly, do something around valuation per se specifically, but we may look at how valuation occurs and what is the racism inherent in that process, and how do you control for it in the charter? Commissioner Yu?
I actually had a question about the appraising. You had a question about who's doing the appraising of the properties. I think that must be related to the real estate licensing. There must be some requirements. I'm wondering if you had an opportunity to ever reach out to the associations to ask this question. I think you're on the money about,
So I've researched everything about this topic. Currently on the New York State Real Estate Appraisal Board, there are no Black representatives sitting under our current first Black Speaker of the House. In his whole term, it has been empty. Also, Cuomo has a seat. So he has 2 seats that's been vacant his whole term, and Cuomo has had 1 seat that's been vacant his whole term. I've already sent 1,000 emails about that. So yes, I know the qualifications. I know all of that. I'm here today because there is some serious issues within the process. There's serious issues, and I'm here because I understand in terms of the charter, but when you have a situation where values are the reason why certain public schools get more funding than others, right? Because if you go downtown to Hunter, which is one of the best public schools in the country, people send their kid to see if they could get in there before they send them to Trinity or Dalton or any of these other prestigious schools. So it is not the public school situation. It is the fact that we have been renting in Harlem for eons, and now we have people who want to tell us that we need to continue to rent and not own anything and pay property tax, so we have an additional supplement of money to get better schools, better fire, better police, and better everything you guys are asking for here today. But if we do not understand how this all works, where it all derives, where the core values and where the core of the problems are, then we will continue to ask for Band-Aids and not get surgery on the wound that we know is there. And I'm just saying, this is a wound that opens up the door for everything that was said today. I can make sure there's a correlation between anything anybody said today and property values. It's there. There's a presentation. I'll be giving it probably in October. I will make sure I send you guys an email. So yes, I do have any answers that you need about this industry, this process. I done spoke to the mayor. He said he don't know. Half of the people was in the building when he said he don't know. I'll send you the video of that too. The senator, nobody knew what was going on. So I don't know
Let me
how
just
this works.
interject here. Spot on. Just want to tell you, you're spot on, right? We're appreciating. It's not just individual nature, family, community, and we have to look at all of these issues. And so our work has to be centered both on individual, family, and community, zip code, et cetera. You're spot on, and I appreciate it. Thank you. Everybody's speaking truth. Commissioner.
Sure, and it's just very quick, and I want to recommend to Bridget, what I recommended before. Please take a look at the charter and help us make the structural changes, or at least recommend them. There's no guarantee that we'll get there, but it has to be presented in a form that we can at least discuss it. So I realize you're an abolitionist. I don't think we're going to get there in this commission, but you can at least take a look.
Push for it.
Yeah, you can at least take a look at the appropriate place in the charter where you think we ought to address it and get it to us. Just one other comment, the comment you made about police unions. There probably is something that can be done to reform the ways in which the disciplinary issues are raised in the contracting. Maybe those two things should be separate. I would encourage you and your colleagues to take a look at that aspect and come back to us with a set of specific recommendations.
You know, something that I see as a organizer is often when we show up to events like this and we bring these issues forward, one of the responses we get is the response that you just gave me. And you tell me as a community member to go and look it up. When you know it, why don't you guys come into our communities and bring what you're telling us to look up right to our
So, Mr. Bridget, with all due respect, I really appreciate what you've raised tonight, the points, the concerns that you've made. We're not here tonight just answering questions. And what I honestly believe that you really want of us at the core is not to just give you an immediate turnaround response. That's very often what does happen. We're here to delve more deeply. And just as some people have said tonight, that the answers often lie within the community, we're here to talk to you because we want to hear what you have to say and what answers perhaps you can provide. So please I don't want you to hear when a commissioner is saying to you, help us to think about this, that we're not trying to be responsive. We want to be inclusive, and we want to hear the voices of people who've been on the ground working on these issues, sometimes persons with lived experience. So we may not have an answer for you tonight. Doesn't mean that when we push it back, that we're just tossing the ball back. We're just saying, we've got to figure this out together. And frankly, sometimes you don't want us to just come up with the answers because they may not be responsive. So I just want you to hear that. I respect what you're saying. I respect the frustration. I just want you to know that part of what we're doing here is saying, help us, because this is your city. And at the end of the day, what we come forward with, you all have to vote on. And so we wanted to reflect your thoughts, your concerns, and what you believe is the change that we need to see. Really appreciate what you're raising. I appreciate everyone's comments here tonight. I'm just going to say one thing as a closing commentary. I serve on the Board of Correction. And one of the things that I'm appreciating right now is that in the weeks of engagement that we've had with the public, I personally have yet to hear anybody talk about what is happening in our New York City jails. And as we talk about what happens to people when they return from incarceration, I think we also need to center on what is happening with people in the jails. And so I'm just raising that. If anybody has thoughts, questions, comments, concerns that you want to share concerning that, please, as I get ready to walk out the door, just touch base with me and we'll go from there. But I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. Your testimony is incredibly important to this process. It's all on public record. We're going to be going back and spending time with it. We've taken copious notes, and I can assure you that what you said tonight is going to shape and inform the recommendations that this commission puts forward to the voting public. Thank you all so much, and I wish you all a very good evening. And one thing I just want to say before you go, we're going to have four more conversations. We're going to have one more in the Bronx, and I believe that is on the 29th of August at a place, the 19th of August at a place to be determined. And so look out for that. Then there'll be another citywide gathering, and there'll be 2 virtual conversations. Thank you all. Have a great evening. Oh, and follow us on social media. If I don't say that, Racial Justice at Racial Justice NYC on Instagram and Facebook, and at Racial Justice NY on Twitter. Thank you. Have a good night.